Hello, my name is Deborah Dwork, and I am the director of the Center for the Study of the Holocaust, Genocide, and Crimes Against Humanity at the Graduate Center, City University of New York. Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine on February 24th, 1 year ago, escalating the war it had unleashed in 2014. With an avowed goal of de-Ukrainianization, Russia rejects the idea of Ukrainian statehood and has declared genocidal goals in Ukraine. Thank you for marking this violent anniversary of invasion by joining this conversation about the war, its long-term consequences, and its genocidal nature. You show your support with your presence. This event is hosted in association with the Center for Jewish Studies at the Graduate Center, CUNY, and the Jack, Joseph, and Morton Mandel Center for Advanced Holocaust Studies at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. It is supported by the Graduate Center's super IT people, and I am grateful for our shared effort. Time is short and the matter is grave. Without further ado, I introduce the moderator of our panel, Dr. Natalya Lazar. Natalya directs the initiative on Ukrainian-Jewish Shared History and the Holocaust in Ukraine at the USHMM. She is responsible for building scholarly programs that focus on the Holocaust as it occurred in Ukraine. Attuned to the need to grow a scholarly community in this area, Natalya envisioned and developed an ongoing residential Ukraine Scholars Program for Ukraine-based USHMM alumni. Natalya, as you have the honor of introducing our discussants, Elissa Bemporad, in conversation with Eugene Finkel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Deborah. It is my great pleasure to introduce my co-moderator, Elissa Bemporad, and our guest, Eugene Finkel. Elissa Bemporad is a professor of history and Unger Chair in Eastern European Jewish History and the Holocaust at Queen's College at CUNY Graduate Center. She is a two-time winner of the National Jewish Book Award. She is the author of Becoming Soviet Jews, Legacy of Blood, and Revolution, Civil War, and New Ways of Life. Elissa is a co-editor of 3 volumes, including Women and Genocides and Pogroms, a Documentary History. She is currently working on a biography of Esther Frumkin and on a study of everyday life in the Italian DP camps. Joining us today is Dr. Eugene Finkel, is a Kenneth H. Keller Associate Professor of International Affairs at Johns Hopkins University. Eugene was born in Ukraine, a political scientist by training. Dr. Finkel is a scholar of genocide and mass violence and politics in East Europe. He is the author of Ordinary Jews, Choice and Survival During the Holocaust, and co-author of Reform and Rebellion in Weak States, published in 2020 by CUP, and Bread and Autocracy, Food, Politics, and Security in Putin's Russia, published by Oxford University Press this year. His next book, To Kill Ukraine, will be published by Basic Books in 2024. Before turning to our guest, I would like to remind our audience that you have an opportunity to ask your question. Please submit them through Q&A chat below. Q&A box below. Correction, chat function is disabled in this live transcription. Thank you. Elissa, Eugene, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Natalya. Let me start by saying that had someone told me a year ago that Russia was about to launch a full-scale invasion of Ukraine and that this war of aggression would have lasted as long as it has, I would have had some difficulties believing him or her. And yet we are now at the beginning of its second year, and based on Russia's intentions confirmed by Putin's recent address, it seems like there is no end in sight. This war is probably one of the most well-documented ones in human history, even despite Russia's ongoing attempt through propaganda to suppress the truth. For those of us who follow closely the events, whether because we have friends and colleagues living in Ukraine, because we care about the future of democracy in the region, or because we are scholars of Eastern Europe and are familiar with Russian imperialism, there seems to be so many turning points in this war over the course of this past year, so many key moments and events, whether it was Bucha, Mariupol, systematic sexual violence against women and girls, the abduction of Ukrainian children. And there are also so many voices and personal accounts that we remember better than others as evidence of this violence. I recently heard the account of an elderly woman from Severodonetsk in Luhansk, in the region of Luhansk, who in tears said, as she was trying to make sense of the events, she said, I was born during the war, and she meant World War II, and I think I will die during this war. So Eugene, I remember very clearly when I received a message from you through Twitter, personal message on February 25th last year, asking me to sign a letter that you drafted together with other colleagues condemning Putin's misrepresentation of Holocaust history by claiming that democratic Ukraine needs to be denazified. You were actually one of the first ones to alert us to the fact that we are witnessing something that at the moment that we were already witnessing something greater than war, that this was actually genocide. The first question that I have for you is, what made you think from the very beginning that this was genocide? And what is the impact of the events of these past 12 months on how our understanding of genocide and mass violence has changed? Has anything changed based on the genocidal war that, Russia is carrying out against Ukraine?
Elissa, and thanks, Natalya. Thanks, everyone, for being here. February 25th last year looks like, decades, if not centuries ago, certainly on a different planet. Right, so going back to a question about, the genocide and why this war and this Russian violence can be viewed as genocidal. So first things first, let's go to the basic definition of what genocide is. And the definition is actions taken with the intent to destroy a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group in whole or in part as such by killing members of the group, creating conditions that will not allow the group to exist, transferring children from one group to another, etc. And here, I think not from the very beginning, but from very early on, there was a tipping point sometime in April when Russians withdrew from the Kiev Oblast and northern Ukraine, where the rhetoric changed completely from, talking about denazifying Ukraine. Obviously, I took many issues with this term, changing the government, but it was more about, quote unquote, liberation rather than destruction. And after the withdrawal from Kiev Oblast, and especially after Bucha, this rhetoric did change from this more neo-colonial language to a language that clearly indicates an intent to destroy a group. So not just in the media, but also state officials started talking about, destroying not just the state, not just changing the state. That in itself is not genocidal, but destroying people and destroying identities and destroying memory and self-identification. So that started giving an indication of an intent to destroy a national group as such. And also from this intent and from this language, you mentioned Putin's speech yesterday, where he alluded that Ukrainians are not real people, not people as human beings, but not real people in the national sense, and that Ukrainians are an invention of Poland and Austro-Hungary. Before the war, there was a talk about Russians and Ukrainians being one and the same, and Ukrainians as a group being a historical mistake. So with that also came the actions. With that, we saw Bucha, we saw Irpin, we saw other places. And also, as those places were liberated, we understood not just that people were killed in large numbers, because people can get killed for many reasons, but that people were explicitly targeted because of their Ukrainians, because they spoke the Ukrainian language, because they were politically active, because they were veterans, because they were state officials, teachers, and also their families. So everyone who had this marker of being not an ethnically, but a politically and nationally Ukrainian got targeted. And that together led me, and I was not alone in that, but also other people, to believe that it is a genocide going on, and the threshold from crimes against humanity or war crimes to genocide has been crossed. It's been April 2022, and since then, I think we have many more similar instances of violence, and more evidence accumulates. Not just the rhetoric, but we know more about who gets killed and arrested and tortured, and also something that is becoming quite prominent in the recent day, the issue of transfer of children. Large numbers of Ukrainian children being kidnapped, taken away from sometimes from their families, sometimes even from their parents, sometimes from orphanages in Russian-occupied Ukraine, and transferred to Russia with an explicit goal to be brought up and educated as Russians. And that's a clear instance of trying to destroy a national group in whole in part as such. Because again, killing civilians, civilians can get killed or can be killed for many reasons, and quite a lot of Russian violence is random violence. Here, in the case of transferring of children, we do have not just the intent, but also the action that fits the Genocide Convention. What has changed, or what is the impact of the war on our understanding of genocide? Well, I think several things do emerge. First, I think people now understand that genocide does not require a very large number of victims. The original Genocide Convention emerged out of the Holocaust, and if people who are not experts know anything about cases of genocide, that would be the Holocaust, Rwanda, the Armenian genocide, so cases featuring hundreds of thousands and millions of dead people, but it does not have to be this way. I mean, there is nothing in the convention about numerical threshold, for instance, and people did start to understand that genocide is more about the goal, the intent to destroy a group, rather than how many people get killed. I think another thing that changed, and in that, I think the genocide that is going on in Ukraine is very different from past instances of genocide, is that it's not about ethnicity or religion. It's about nationality. It's a targeting of a national group, which is also a protected group under the convention. But if you look at previous cases of genocides, they were either racially or ethnically or religiously motivated, not nationally motivated. In that, Ukraine is different. It doesn't really matter what ethnicity you are in Ukraine to get killed as a Ukrainian. We also realized that non-murderous parts of genocide, like transfer of children, are important. And for me, it also was a bit of an eye-opener, even after studying genocide and teaching genocide for many years, for me, there was always the question, well, why do we need those items or those behaviors or those actions like transfer of children? Usually it has to go together with mass murder, but apparently it does not have to be this way. And we see it in Ukraine. And I was also very critical in the past about the convention, because the convention requires to prove intent to destroy a group, which is very hard to prove because perpetrators are not stupid people. They usually know the consequences of what they're doing, so they will, either hide their intentions, so they will couch them in bureaucratic language. They will make everything to make proving intent hard. But here we see a state that is essentially almost advertising its intent. It's all over the media. It's all over official statements. And, for some time, I just couldn't wrap my head around this. Why are they doing it? Don't they know that there might be consequences? And I still don't have an answer. Maybe they don't think there are consequences, but the fact is that in some cases, proving intent is actually not that hard.
So thank you, Eugene. And actually, a quick follow-up question on what you just said. I guess I'm wondering if you think that we have enough information now to persecute people for genocide, perpetrators of genocide. It's related to what you just said about the spokespersons of the Russian state propaganda machine that are very open about their intentions. So do we have enough information to persecute people for genocide?
Right. So I want to, qualify everything I say, but admitting that I'm not a lawyer and I will not have to be dealing with those cases. And I have many arguments with international lawyers who do have to prove intent in court because they are much more cautious about using the genocide label in this case than, historians or social scientists will look at the event as a whole and say genocide is going on. For them, the question is, well, how do we prove it in the court of law? And I think answering your question, I think we have enough evidence to prosecute people who are the least likely to be prosecuted, so the higher-ups, like Putin or Shoigu or the military top brass, or even the propagandists, the talking heads on Russian TV who advertise killing civilians in large numbers. Prosecuting those people, we certainly have enough information. It's just not very likely that either Ukraine or international tribunals will ever lay their hands on them. And I'm very skeptical about internal prosecutions happening in Russia anytime soon. And the people that can be prosecuted, those lower level perpetrators on the ground who might be captured by Ukrainian security services or police, soldiers who are taken prisoner. Well, for them, it becomes much harder because for them, it is hard to prove intent. Yes, there is all this genocidal talk at the very top, but proving that those people, if and when they killed civilians, were driven by this very ideology or this very motivation, rather than, just being drunk or indiscriminate in their violence, is much harder. It doesn't mean that they can't be prosecuted for war crimes or crimes against humanity or other transgressions, but for genocide, at least in my view, in the vast majority of cases, we don't have enough data.
Okay, I want to switch gears and think about the question of resistance. So when we study genocide, or when we study mass violence, of course, we focus a lot on the crimes carried out by the perpetrators, on their motivation, but we also study resistance, how victims resist genocidal violence or mass violence. And we have witnessed some extraordinary instances of resistance to Russia's systematic violence. Some forms of resistance, or I would say more ordinary or more mundane. For example, we've seen, we see youngsters go to the theater or to a club in the midst of war, or, music bands playing music in the subway. But then we see other instances of resistance that really include, people putting their lives at risk to evacuate others who are at the front line, distributing medication or food, or even rescuing cultural treasures that are under attack. So I'm wondering if you could share with us your thoughts about Ukrainian resistance and how Ukrainians are coping with what is happening, especially in light of your work, the work you've done, especially for your book, Ordinary Jews, where you've studied very closely the choices and the actions of Jews during the Holocaust in this region.
Right, that's a wonderful question, and not an easy one to answer, because we are dealing with so many different types of behavior or resistance. Was I surprised? No, actually I wasn't. I wasn't, because Ukrainian society historically is very active and historically is willing to take risks for political stands and for social stands. Look at the Maidan of 2014, look at previous instances, look at how many years it took the Soviets to pacify Western Ukraine after World War II. Obviously, I take many issues with the ideology and beliefs of those people who fought against the Soviets in Western Ukraine, the Ukrainian nationalists, but in terms of their commitment and their activism and their willingness to risk their lives, it was extremely high, if not extraordinary. So in that sense, no, I actually did expect this kind of activism. And another thing that is quite important about Ukrainians historically, that they don't need the state to organize them. They can organize from below, and they're used to organizing from below and on an individual basis. And that's an important distinction between Ukrainian and, for instance, Russian culture, where the role of the state in organizing people is much higher. So the activism and the risk-taking did not surprise me. What did surprise me is how quickly and how efficiently it was. What did surprise me in this resistance, actually, most of all, is how resilient and effective the Ukrainian state proved to be. Because I think we all underestimated Ukrainian state capacity, especially on the local level. So, talking about coping and resistance, it's not just, people who fight, it's also, people who clean the streets and repair electricity grid an hour or two after an attack with a huge personal risk for themselves. People who run the Ukrainian railroads, who are much more efficient and much more reliable in work time than Amtrak in the US can ever be. So, and that's also an instance of resistance and organization that, to me, it was surprising. And from my, conversations with other people who study Ukrainian politics and Ukrainian society, the societal resilience and mobilization did not surprise many people. How good the state is, especially at the local level, did come as a surprise.
Yes, I agree with you that I had similar thoughts about the state and the way in which the state, especially at the local level, responded to the war. I would like to ask you now about art and culture in times of war. and mass violence, and whether art can be left untouched by national and political passions. More specifically, there has been a lot of discussion, and I'm sure you're aware of this, about whether this war is about Putin or about Pushkin, the great Russian poet celebrated by both the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union. So is Russian literature and art, are they also channels for Russian imperialism? You know, within Ukraine, writers have called for the boycott of Russian books, Russian authors, Pushkin's monuments, among others, which were erected all over the territories of the Russian Empire, and in 1937 throughout the territories of the Soviet Union, and after 1945 in newly occupied territories, are now being dismantled in Ukraine as markers of Russian imperialism. So I wanted to ask you, how do we make sense of this? Is this a necessary step in the direction of decolonizing Ukraine, of establishing, you know, of the new Ukraine that will emerge after the war and after victory? What do you think?
Well, I don't think it's a necessary step, but it's certainly a step that people in Ukraine are willing to take, and it should be their choice rather than ours, you know, which monuments to keep and which monuments to destroy. But, you know, going to your point about, you know, Putin or Pushkin, I don't think it's either or, it's both. You know, Putin certainly does play a role, and the person who decided to invade in 2014 and in 2022 was not Pushkin, but Putin and people around him. And, you know, a different set of people, history might have looked differently. It doesn't mean that, you know, the war was or was not inevitable, but it would have been different without. But on the same level and at the same time, culture is also very important, you know, to create the society, its norm, its expectations, its thinking, and it does play a role in making Russia what it is in regards to Ukraine. So, you know, removing statutes, well, I certainly can understand it from the perspective of Ukrainians, and not just Pushkin. You know, just to give you a personal example. So this semester I teach a class that focuses on the war, but not just the war, just the history of Russian-Ukrainian violence from 19th century. And one of the things that we read for this class a couple of weeks ago was Bulgakov's White Guard. And I read it, you know, many years ago. I knew what it is about, but I have forgotten how vehemently, violently xenophobic and anti-Ukrainian it is, right? And to me, reading it in 2022, or not actually 2023, came as a major revelation. And for me, the question was not why, you know, people are arguing about in Ukraine about canceling quote unquote Bulgakov or removing, you know, the plaques from the home in which he lived, but why on earth haven't they done it before? You know, why commemorate a person who hate you so much? And Bulgakov, and Bulgakov is not the only instance, of course. So speaking about boycotts, I can certainly understand where Ukrainians are coming from, especially during wartime, or, you know, when it comes to boycotting Russian artists who support the war. But, you know, stopping reading Russian literature altogether, no, I don't think it's the way to go, precisely because we need to understand this culture, we need to understand its history in order to, if not change it, then at least to be ready for what might come next.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for this. Next question. I've been thinking a lot about, you know, the fact that there are so many talks, seminars, webinars like ours, events that are being organized throughout mostly the US, but also many cities in Western Europe and elsewhere to mark this anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And while we organize and participate in these events in many parts of Ukraine right now, there is a growing sense of panic and concern about how Russia will mark this anniversary tomorrow, right? I spoke to a friend in Kyiv yesterday who mentioned the fear. Mentioned the fact that many offices are closed today and tomorrow. Schools are operating remotely because of, this fear. So the question that I have for you is, what role will this war and the memory of this war play in the Ukraine of the future, in the national and Ukrainian national identity after the war, after victory? What place will Ukrainian nationalism and, for example, the heroes of World War II, Stepan Bandera, for example, play in the Ukraine of the future? Will we witness a radicalization of Ukrainian nationalism, or not? And connected to this question is, the language question. Will we be moving in the direction of, a monolingual nation state, where there is this kind of rejection of Russian, or can we still have, and I hope we will have perhaps a bilingual Ukraine, where Russian still has a status so there are many layers to this question, but I connected to the question of, again, the memory of this war. What will it do to, the Ukraine of the future and Ukrainian nationalism and identity?
Definitely a bazillion-dollar question.
I'm sorry, Eugene, we missed the beginning of your answer.
I said, yes, a bazillion-dollar question about how Ukraine emerges out of this war and which Ukraine emerge out of this war. So it's probably easier for me to take it in the reverse order and start with the language. So that I definitely see Ukrainian becoming more and more prominent, not just as a state language or as an official language, but also as a language of day-to-day communication. I know quite a few people who were born Russian speakers and decided to switch to Ukrainian as a result of this war. And I don't think that once the war is over, they will switch back to Ukrainian. At the same time, I don't think that Russian as a language of day-to-day communication is going to disappear completely. I mean, people still speak Russian among themselves, and there, in my view, will be a place for Russian in a day-to-day communication. But the public spheres, the media, the government, the politics and the streets as well will be much more Ukrainianized, if there's even such a word, than before. So definitely going towards a predominantly Ukrainian state, but I don't see Russia going anywhere, especially if the war ends with the liberation of Donbass or even Crimea. Those people are not going to switch to Ukrainian overnight. As for the memory, well, I think it all depends on how this war ends now. In the question, you premised it on, well, what kind of memory will emerge out of Ukrainian victory? But unfortunately, I don't know how this war ends and how victory might look like and what it will be. So, and it depends on Ukrainians, right? It can be about liberating all territories, but it does not have to. If Ukrainians decide that the war ends in the victory, then that's how it will be. If they decide that what they have at the end of the war is not victory, then no matter how much territory they liberated, it will be defeat. And I think for the question of national memory and identity, that will be the key. Because if it ends in a defeat, we're certainly going to a much darker place, a much more nationalist, a much more xenophobic, a much more aggressive place than before. And we have quite clear historical examples. You mentioned Bandera and the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, who are violently, extremely nationalist, but they were a reaction to the earlier generation of Ukrainian politicians who are moderate, inclusive, democratic, and they failed. And the younger generation of Bandera and his followers rejected their politics. They saw democracy and moderation as a source of failure, and that's why they embraced violence. So if Ukraine loses or feels that it's lost, then it's definitely going to a very dark place, because this feeling of loss, coupled with a trauma of genocide, both societal trauma and personal traumas, will overshadow Ukrainian politics for many years. If Ukraine wins, it still doesn't ensure that, that more inclusive identity and memory will triumph. But at least it becomes much more likely. I'm not, obviously Bandera and his people and Don will still have their cult and their followers in Western Ukraine, and there is a chance that it will spread elsewhere. We already see it spreading to the center and parts of the East, not because those people, killed Jews and Poles and hated everyone else and were authoritarian, but because they fought against Moscow and died for independent Ukraine. So we do see that, but still, I think that that for Ukraine, this war, if and they hopefully when, and the sooner the better it ends in complete Ukrainian victory, will be an opportunity to move beyond this whole debate about, Bandera or non-Bandera. There will be new heroes, there will be new myths, there will be an entire generation of people who fought on the front lines, risked their lives, who will want and deserve recognition as the heroes of New Ukraine. And I think they should, and they should get this recognition. And if that happens, Ukraine will be a much healthier place. Because if the Bandera cult takes over, it's not just it will poison Ukrainian politics domestically. It will also alienate allies that Ukraine cannot afford alienating, like Poland or Germany. With Bandera as prominent as it is in Western Ukraine, in the rest of Ukraine, Ukraine can kiss goodbye to NATO and the EU most likely.
Right.
And strategically, yeah.
No, I'm sorry, Eugene. Yeah, I cut you.
And it will also give more weapons and more ammunition to the Russian propaganda. So it's just strategically not a very smart way to go. So I'm hopeful, but again, it depends on how the war ends.
Right, that's an excellent question that you raise, in a way the leverage that the West, Poland, Germany, the NATO countries have on the memory of on the shaping the narrative of this war, and on preventing, I guess, Bandera from becoming a major hero in public consciousness in Ukraine. You touched already upon this question, which is my last question, because I want to give time to Natalya to ask some of the questions that we've received from the audience. And this is a tricky question. I know that you are not a prophet, but perhaps political scientists might be better equipped than historians to answer the following question, which is, how does the war end? How do you anticipate this war ending? And if you prefer not to answer that question, then what will you be paying the closest attention to in the year ahead?
Right. So how does it end? I'm not a prophet. And I don't think that political scientists are better at predicting the future than historians who are just better and not being shy about things that we don't know. But I do think, I have to think, and I have to believe that it ends with complete Ukrainian victory, the sooner the better. In terms of what to pay attention to, well, obviously, the resilience of the Ukrainian society, which is extremely resilient, but each resilience has its limits. And a lot of this resilience boils down to Western support. And Western support, right now, in my view, boils down to what happens in the GOP-controlled House of Representatives. So my biggest fear was that, in the midterm elections or after midterm elections, there would be a major shift in US support for Ukraine if and when Republicans take the House or the Senate. Now, we know that it hasn't happened. Maybe it hasn't happened yet. And, it was very encouraging to see President Biden in Kyiv a couple of days ago. But there are forces within the Republican Party who do try to derail US support for Ukraine. And without active Western support, I don't think that the Ukrainian society can hold as effectively as it did. Not that the war will stop, but Ukraine will be in a much worse shape.
Okay, thank you very much, Eugene. And I'm going to turn the floor to Natalya.
Thank you, Elissa. Thank you, Eugene. We received several questions from our audience, and I'll just summarize briefly. Some of them were related that you already answered. They were related to the issue of kidnapping or transferring children to Russia. The second block of questions are actually dealing with post-war justice or post-genocidal justice and how difficult it will be to prosecute perpetrators. So I think Eugene already addressed it. The next block of questions are actually dealing with the situation on the ground, and particularly one question came from our viewer. She's asking, what is the response of Ukrainian Jewish community to the ongoing war? Do we know how they involved? I can name a few questions, and if Eugene is okay, you can take several of them. And the second question is actually about the role of the social media in propelling these anti-Ukrainian propaganda in Russia and also in the West. What do you think we can do about that? How we can fight that? So I'll stop here and we'll give you an opportunity to answer.
Thank you. So I think on the Ukrainian Jewish community, you, Natalya, and Elissa are as well equipped to answer as I am, because you also follow it. But based on what I see, I don't see much different. I mean, so when we're talking about Ukrainian Jewish community, we're talking about both Jewish community within Ukraine and also the Ukrainian Jewish diaspora. And within Ukraine, I personally haven't seen much difference in responses to the war between Jewish and non-Jewish Ukrainians. I mean, granted, this community is not very large, and there are not that very many people, but I see the same level of mobilization and commitment as in the rest of the society. Again, I don't claim to have any representative data. It's just the people that I talk to. And added to that, also among many, there is a sense of deep personal offense about Putin and Russia appropriating and misusing the language of the Holocaust and genocide and World War II and denazification. Quite a few people I know take it very, very personally. A much more interesting dynamics, I think, are happening within the Ukrainian-Jewish diaspora, where we do see, growing both mobilization and also commitment to Ukraine that I have not seen before the war. So, people who have their grandparents or great-grandparents coming from Ukraine, again, Jews, suddenly start identifying themselves as Ukrainian Jews or even Ukrainians. And to me, it was absolutely eye-opening. I couldn't imagine seeing that, but I have seen it among many people who start talking about themselves as Ukrainians. So in that sense, I think the biggest change is happening within the Ukrainian-Jewish diaspora, in the sense that it is becoming a Ukrainian-Jewish diaspora, and it is becoming much closer to the broader Ukrainian diaspora. Because in the past, as you know, probably as well as I am, the relations between the Ukrainian diaspora and the Jewish diaspora, especially from Ukraine, was quite contentious. And the war, I think, did more to achieve Ukrainian-Jewish reconciliation than all the committees and all the educational projects could do combined. As for social media, but I honestly would love to hear what you and Elissa have to say about this as well. As for social media, yes, it's definitely a tool to propagate Russian propaganda, but it's also a very effective tool to combat Russian propaganda, and there are insane levels of social media mobilization to support Ukraine. Quite a lot of financial support and fundraising efforts to help Ukraine are almost exclusively social media based. So here I think the role of social media is not just to propagate Russian propaganda, but it also helps quite a lot. Again, not having any hard data, my intuition is that social media in this war is net positive for Ukraine.
Thank you.
I'm happy to jump in just very quickly about this question. I would agree. I don't know much about the response on the part of the Ukrainian Jewish diaspora. I'm more familiar with the response within Ukraine on the part of Jews, and I would agree with you, Eugene, that there is very little difference in terms of mobilization and support for for Ukraine in the context of this war. I was recently in Chernovtsi, and I met with different members of actually different Jewish communities, both conservative and Orthodox, and I was very impressed with the level of support, commitment. A few members of the community had sons who were fighting, who are fighting in Donetsk. So, and also I want to mention the role that the chief rabbi of Ukraine and Rabbi Osman in Kiev has been doing for, his support of Ukrainian refugees from different, non-Jews from different parts of Ukraine. And he has taken a very public role in condemning Russia. So I just wanted to share that very quickly.
Thank you, Elissa. I agree with both of you. I'm not going to go in details on this. We have very little time, and I really want to give the floor to our viewers. So I will continue. There's a comment. I'll just read it. There's no need to answer that, I think. But you talk about Ukrainian nationalism. What is Ukrainian nationalism? It's simply wanting to be Ukrainian, not Russian. Is being nationalistic. Another viewer is asking us, I wonder if in case of this genocide, one can also clearly distinguish its preparation phrase at the level of dehumanizing propaganda language. For example, reducing Ukrainian citizens to fascists, etc. Is it not currently repeated by some talking heads in the world? And one more, very short one. but I think Eugene already addressed somewhat this issue. I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about how this recent uptick in Russian aggression in Ukraine fits into a larger historical pattern of Russian imperialism in Ukraine. Very simple questions.
Yeah, very simple question. So about what Ukrainian nationalism is, no, I actually do think that yes, wanting to be Ukrainian as separate from Russian is nationalism. It just, I don't see anything wrong about this nationalism, and it's more a feature of U.S. discourse about nationalism that that the word itself has negative connotation. There is absolutely nothing wrong with civic inclusive nationalism. So I'm absolutely in favor of this nationalism. Now, on the other hand, having Ukraine for Ukrainians ethnically defined is also nationalism, but it's not a kind of nationalism that I'm on board with. The question about the last one about historical patterns. So, I have a lot to say about it. I think it fits very well. I think when we look at what Russia has done in Ukraine and to Ukraine over the last several hundred years, there is a clear pattern about obsession with Ukraine and obsession about controlling Ukraine for both security and identity reasons on the parts of Russia. I mean, the mix can change. Sometimes it can be more about identity, sometimes can be more about security, but both motivations are always there. And in terms of methods, it's actually when I'm not an historian, so I had to educate myself quite a lot about the earlier cases. And the first one I started with is the Russian occupation of Bukovina and Eastern Galicia during World War I. And when I look at what exactly the Russians did, during that time, you could copy-paste it to what they're doing in Kherson and Mariupol, and you will not be wrong. Just change the dates, but the policies remain pretty much the same, up to changing streets' name to exactly the same name and changing the alphabet and all the other things that they do. So I think it is definitely a continuation of a much broader and much longer historical pattern.
Thank you. We have several questions that refer to the term genocide being used to describe the Russian aggression in Ukraine. One of our viewers is asking whether it would be better, whether it would be more efficient to, even for the trial and the prosecution to imply the term crimes against humanity, and is asking about your position in this question. And one more question is from our viewer who is interested to know whether we are seeing there's obviously an interest to Ukraine and Ukrainian history, Ukrainian studies in the US and also in Europe. Do you think that this war in a way will also somehow impact the development of Ukrainian studies in the Western Academy? Well, I'll stop here.
Mm-hmm. So crimes against humanity, yes, it's certainly easier to prove. The bar is lower, and therefore quite a few lawyers who are not so keen on using the term genocide are happy, no, not happily is not the right word, but willingly agree that crimes against humanity definitely that can be proven. Genocide is much harder to prove. I think the same logic operates within the US government when 2 or 3 days ago, Secretary Blinken, defined Russian actions as crimes against humanity, but did not use the G word. My comment on that is that yes, for post-war trials, it might be easier to prove, but genocide does not have the same moral weight, the same, political gravity, the same ability to mobilize attention and actions as crimes against humanity do. So so for prevention purposes, and also for historical purposes, it's, in my view, much more important to use the word genocide, even if the bar is higher, but I think we can prove the bar. I would not have used the word if I did not believe fully 100% that the term does apply. But once it does apply, I see no reason not using it, even though some people might take issue with that, and crimes against humanity are easier to prove. In terms of uptick in Ukrainian studies and more interests, I hope that happens, but I would want to see more data and more information, whether there is certainly much more interest right now in the US academia. Let's wait and see whether it's just an artifact of the war and then things will go back to what they were after the war is over, or whether this trend continues. I very much hope that it does, but I think, at least for me, it's too early to tell.
Thank you. There are too many questions and we have a few minutes left. I will just read two of them. And thank you for this talk. Would be interested to hear about the dimensions of collaboration or accommodation among the Ukrainian population and how the Ukrainian state is addressing these questions, particularly in areas recently freed from Ukrainian occupation. And one more, the final question, is from our viewer who is asking, going back to the question of how we should define Ukrainian victory, if Ukraine doesn't free all of its territories, can it still be claimed a victory? Can we still consider it a victory? Thank you.
No, I think victory is what Ukrainians decide what victory is. If at some point they decide that territory is not worth fighting for, and just surviving and beating Russians back and keeping their independence is a victory, then that will be a victory for Ukraine. I don't see it happening in the current climate. I think there need to be quite a lot of mental shift, or maybe tiredness, or fatigue for that to happen. But I also don't think that it's inconceivable. After all, victory is what Ukrainians tell themselves what victory is. So it's up to Ukrainians, definitely not up to outsiders. And there are many options here. As for the question of collaboration, it's a wonderful question and obviously a very painful one. We know that it did happen in Russian occupied territories on many levels. The political level, the local leaders who actively collaborated and served in the administration that the Russians set up. Some eliminated, some escaped, some will be prosecuted, and also lower level collaboration with the Russians, which we still don't know the exact extent of it. I know that in the Ukrainian law enforcement, there are debates about what to do with those people. In every occupation, there are collaborators, of course, and every time there is a liberation of a territory, then this question needs to be addressed. I think at least as for myself, I just don't know enough to say about, any numbers or consistent policies. It will emerge, especially if Donbass is liberated. It will become a huge issue, but how Ukraine will handle with that, I honestly do not know.
Thank you, Eugene. Thank you, Elissa. Thank you for this conversation. Thank you to our viewers for your questions. You will receive the recordings of this discussion in the following days. I stop here and turn the floor to Deborah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Eugene, Elissa, and Natalya. Your discussion challenges us to imagine anew, to think anew, and to worry anew. Thank you to all. Goodbye.